She pointed her finger straight at his chest in front of everyone and said, "Men like you don't belong here." Tommy Jameson didn't flinch, didn't blink. Because he'd had rifles pointed at his face in places most people can't even find on a map. A manicured finger from a woman in a Chanel blazer that wasn't a threat. That was an invitation. What Catherine Foster didn't know, what none of them knew, was exactly what kind of man she had just made an enemy of. And before this story is over, she would find out. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. It started the way most humiliations do, quietly in a room full of people who had already decided who you were before you opened your mouth. Tommy Jameson had driven 40 minutes to get to Riverside Community Center that Tuesday morning. His truck, a 2009 Ford F-150 with a cracked side mirror and 190,000 miles on it, sat in the parking lot like an old dog among show horses, surrounded by Tesla Model X's and BMW SUVs, with personalized plates that said things like BOSSQN and CEOLIFE. He'd worn his good flannel, the dark green one Sophie had picked out for him at Target 6 months ago. She'd held it up, grinning that gap-toothed grin of hers, and said, "Daddy, this one makes you look like a real person." He'd laughed so hard he nearly knocked over a display rack. Sophie, 7 years old, dark hair, blue eyes just like her mother's, and a laugh that could make a hardened combat veteran forget, even if just for a minute, that the world had ever been brutal. She was the reason he was standing in that parking lot, smoothing down his flannel, rehearsing small talk, like it was mission prep. Name's Tommy, single dad, new to the area, just looking to get my daughter into Maplewood. Simple, honest, clean. He'd run SEAL ops in 4 countries. He'd led men through flooded tunnels in the dark, with nothing but a compass and nerve. He'd been pinned down in Helmand Province with 2 bullets in his vest and still managed to extract his entire team. But walking into a room full of strangers who judged you by your zip code, that somehow was harder. The community orientation for Maplewood Academy's parent integration program was held in a conference room that smelled like fresh paint and old money. The chairs were cushioned. There was a table with pastries none of the women seemed to be eating. Someone had set up a little banner that read, "Welcome Maplewood Families," in the kind of cheerful font that made Tommy feel vaguely suspicious. He grabbed a coffee from the table and found a seat near the back, old habit, always near the exit, always facing the door. He counted 12 other parents in the room. 11 of them looked like they'd walked off a country club brochure. The 12th was a heavy-set man in a polo shirt who caught Tommy's eye and gave him a look that said, "Yeah, I don't belong here either." Tommy almost smiled. Then the door opened. Catherine Foster walked in like she owned the room. Because in every way that mattered to the people in that room, she did. She was mid-40s, sharp jaw, blonde hair pulled back tight. She wore a blazer the color of gunmetal over a white silk blouse, and her heels clicked against the hardwood with a precision that reminded Tommy of a metronome. She was carrying a leather portfolio and a coffee cup with her name on it, not from the table, her own. From somewhere else. She scanned the room once, and Tommy recognized the look immediately. Threat assessment. It was the same thing he did every time he walked into an unknown space. She wasn't military, he'd have bet his life on that, but she was calculating. Efficient. Her eyes moved fast-filed people into categories dismissed or retained. When her gaze reached him, it paused. Just for half a second, but Tommy caught it. Then she looked away. Bang. The orientation ladder, a pleasant, nervous woman named Deborah, who clearly had not been prepared for Catherine Foster, launched into a PowerPoint presentation about Maplewood Academy's community-first philosophy and parent engagement ecosystem. Tommy tried to follow along. He really did. But he kept watching the room, and the other parents deferred to Catherine automatically. She hadn't said a word yet, but when she leaned over to whisper something to the woman beside her, the woman laughed immediately. When Catherine frowned at one of Deborah's slides, Deborah faltered mid-sentence. Alpha, Tommy thought. Alpha who's never been tested. The most dangerous kind. He'd seen it in officers who came up through politics instead of combat. Smart. Polished. Used to winning by positioning rather than performance. They were fine right up until the moment things went sideways, and they had no idea what to do. He wasn't thinking about her in any strategic sense. He just noticed. It was wired into him by now. Read the room. Read the people. Know who leads and who follows. Deborah wrapped up the slideshow and opened the floor. We always love to do a quick round of introductions at these orientations. It helps families feel connected. Would anyone like to start? The woman next to Catherine, thin red-headed diamond studs the size of thumbnails, raised her hand immediately. I'm Priscilla Langford. My husband Robert and I are so thrilled to be part of the Maplewood community. Robert is the regional director at Meridian Capital, and we have twins entering 2nd grade. She touched her pearls. We've been on the wait list for 3 years. 3 years. Tommy filed that away. The introductions moved around the room. An architect. A surgeon. A woman who described herself as a lifestyle entrepreneur, which Tommy translated as, I have enough money to not need a real job. Another woman who mentioned her family's charitable foundation twice in 30 seconds. Tommy counted his breaths the way he had in the mountains of Afghanistan when they were lying still in Overwatch waiting. Steady. Don't overthink it. Then it was his turn. He sat up a little straighter, kept his voice even. Tommy Jameson, single dad. He paused. My daughter Sophie's 7. We just relocated from Virginia Beach. He glanced down at the floor for just a second, which was the only tell he ever showed. I'm transitioning out of the military. Navy. Finished my last deployment about 8 months ago. Sophie's a great kid, smart, curious. Maplewood came highly recommended, and I'd love for her to be part of this community. He stopped. Silence. Not the warm, nodding kind of silence, the evaluating kind. Priscilla Langford gave a tight smile. The lifestyle entrepreneur looked down at her phone. The surgeon cleared his throat. And then Catherine Foster spoke. She didn't look at him directly at first. She addressed the room, or more precisely, she addressed the air above his left shoulder in the way powerful people do when they want to diminish someone without the vulgarity of outright confrontation. Military transition can be quite challenging, she said, the way someone says bless your heart in the South. There are resources for that, programs, veterans centers. A small smile. But I do wonder if Maplewood is the right fit for every family. The academic culture here is quite rigorous, and the parent involvement requirements are substantial. Tommy looked at her. She finally looked back. No offense intended, she added. I just think transparency serves everyone better. He could feel the room's temperature shift. Not dramatically, just the way a room shifts when someone has just been put in their place and everyone is waiting to see if they accept it. Tommy let 3 full seconds go by. None taken, he said, quiet, even. And he held her gaze for exactly 1 beat longer than she expected. After the orientation, there was a casual mixer in the hallway. More pastries, more coffee, small clusters of people doing the elaborate social dance of networking while pretending not to network. Tommy stood near the edge with his coffee and watched. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. He hadn't expected warmth exactly. The military had adjusted that particular expectation out of him years ago. But there was something about the naked transactionality of these people, the way they circled each other, looking for advantage, looking for connection, only insofar as connection served purpose, that felt oddly familiar. It's like a firebase, he thought. Everybody's protecting their own perimeter. The heavy-set man in the polo found him again, extended a hand. Gary Kowalski, my daughter's Lily, she's in 2nd grade. He had a Chicago accent and a handshake like a truck door closing. Don't let it bother you. Catherine Foster runs this school like she owns it, even though she doesn't. Does she have kids here? A son, 8th grade, came in as a donor family 3 years ago, gave the new gym wing. Gary shrugged. Her company NextCore Technologies, you heard of it? Can't say I have. Software. Defense contracts, actually. Billions. She's on the board of 3 nonprofits, 2 hospitals, and the city planning committee. He lowered his voice. She decides who gets into Maplewood, unofficially, but everybody knows. Tommy said nothing for a moment. Defense contracts, he repeated. Gary nodded. Ironic, right? Makes her money off guys like you, then acts like you showed up to her dinner party without a reservation. Bang. A laugh moved through Tommy's chest, but it didn't quite reach his face. What about the actual admissions process? Exists on paper. Gary glanced sideways. But the head of school, Dr. Marsh, has been at Catherine's fundraising dinners 6 times this year. Count them, 6. He grabbed a mini croissant off a passing tray. Just saying, be smart about it. Go through the formal process, dot every I, cross every T. Don't give them a reason. He looked at Tommy steadily. And don't poke the bear. Tommy looked across the hallway to where Catherine Foster was holding court, laughing at something touching someone's arm, working the room with the effortless efficiency of a person who had never once questioned their right to dominate it. I'm not here to poke anything, Tommy said. I'm here for my daughter. Gary nodded slowly. Good answer. He bit the croissant. That's the right answer. Show. Tommy stayed another 20 minutes out of sheer stubbornness. He introduced himself to Deborah, who was sweet and genuinely warm, and clearly uncomfortable with the social dynamics around her. He met a young Korean-American mother named Janet, who was new to the city, nervous and relieved to find someone equally out of their depth. They exchanged numbers. He said he'd keep in touch. He was heading toward the exit when Catherine Foster materialized in his path, not by accident. He could see that immediately. She had positioned herself near the door, angled toward him, talking to Priscilla, but watching him in her peripheral vision. When he got close enough, she turned. Mr. Jameson? He stopped. Mrs. Foster. Ms. Foster. Slight correction. Deliberate. I wanted to apologize if my comments earlier came across as unwelcoming. They did, he said simply. She blinked. Recovered. I was simply trying to be candid. The Maplewood parent community is quite demanding. We organize events, fundraisers, volunteer rotations. I know how to organize people, Tommy said. Yes, I'm sure. The smile was professional, controlled. But this isn't the military, Mr. Jameson. Leadership here requires a different kind of diplomacy. He studied her face for a moment. Smart eyes. No warmth in them. Not cruelty either, something more precise than that. Calculation. Ms. Foster, he said, keeping his voice conversational. I spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL. I have led men in situations where the cost of failure wasn't a bad quarterly report. It was lives. He paused. I think I can handle a school fundraiser. Something shifted in her expression so brief it was almost nothing. Then the professional face snapped back into place. Of course, she said. Good luck with the application. She turned back to Priscilla, as if he'd already ceased to exist. Tommy walked out into the afternoon sun, keys in his hand, jaw set. He sat in his truck for a minute, breathed. Then he pulled out his phone and called the one person he could always call. How bad was it? Said the voice on the other end. Master Chief Delroy D. Rock Washington. Retired. Tampa, Florida. 30 years of service and a laugh that could shake a wall. Scale of 1 to Fallujah, Tommy said. Just give me the number. 4. That's not bad. She basically told me I didn't belong there, in front of 12 strangers. A pause. And what did you do? Stayed. Smiled. Left on my own terms. D-Rock's tone shifted into something warmer. That's right. That's exactly right, brother. A beat. Sophie know anything about this? No, and she won't. Tommy leaned his head back against the headrest. She's got enough going on. New town, new school, no friends yet. She doesn't need to know her dad got dismissed by a woman in a $500 blazer. You know what's funny? Tell me, you know what's... This woman, Catherine, whoever she thinks she sized you up in about 30 seconds? She does. But she don't know what 30 seconds actually looks like when you do it. D-Rock chuckled. She looked at a man in a flannel shirt with a cracked truck mirror and made all her decisions. She don't know anything. She don't know Kandahar. She don't know Coronado. She don't know what you had to become to do what we did. Tommy was quiet. You're not a veteran transitioning into her world, Tommy, D-Rock said. You're a man she has no category for. And that is always the most dangerous thing to be. Back home, which was a rented two-bedroom house on Callaway Street, modest but clean with a small backyard where Sophie had already claimed a corner for a nature laboratory that consisted of 3 rocks and a dead butterfly, Tommy made spaghetti for dinner. Sophie sat at the kitchen table doing her homework, legs swinging, pencil tapping against the wood in a rhythm that drove him mildly insane, and that he would never in a million years tell her to stop. So, how was the school meeting? She asked without looking up. Good, he said, stirring the sauce. Did you make friends? He thought about Gary Kowalski and Janet. A couple. Did you talk about me? I talked about you the whole time. She grinned. What did you say? I said you were the smartest 7-year-old in Virginia Beach, and that any school that doesn't take you is making a catastrophic mistake. She considered this. That's accurate. He set the bowl of pasta in front of her and sat down across the table. She was already eating before he had his fork out. Daddy, she said, mouth slightly full. What's a legacy family? He froze. Where'd you hear that? Emma next door said her mom said Maplewood only really takes legacy families. She twirled pasta onto her fork with focus. What does that mean? Tommy looked at his daughter, at the seriousness in those blue eyes, at the way she processed the world, front on, no filter, no fear. She got that from her mother. The fearlessness. She got the stubbornness from him. It means families who've had people at the school for a long time, he said carefully. But it doesn't mean only those families, and it definitely doesn't mean us. He met her eyes. You're going to that school, Soph. I promise you. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once with the gravity of someone much older than 7. Okay, she said. I trust you. He had been told he was brave many times. By officers, by president's representatives, by men who had watched him do things that defied reasonable description. Those words never hit him the way 3 words from a 7-year-old girl hit him right then. I trust you. He picked up his fork. Good, he said. Now eat your spaghetti. That night after Sophie was asleep, Tommy sat at the kitchen table with her Maplewood application in front of him. He'd been working on it for 3 weeks. Recommendation letters, 1 from his former commanding officer, 1 from his unit's chaplain who had known Sophie since she was 3, and called her the most formidable person under 4 feet tall I have ever encountered. Financial documentation, Sophie's academic records from Virginia Beach, her reading assessment, which placed her 2 grade levels ahead, her behavioral evaluations, all excellent. The essay he'd written about their move, about why Maplewood, about what he believed Sophie deserved. It was a strong application. He knew that. But he also knew that paper sometimes wasn't enough. He thought about what Catherine Foster had said. Leadership here requires a different kind of diplomacy. He thought about what D-Rock had said. She don't know what you had to become to do what we did. He thought about Sophie's face at the dinner table. I trust you. He put the application in the envelope, sealed it. Then he went to the window and stood there for a while in the dark, the way he used to stand watch when they were embedded overseas, looking out at the quiet street. The sodium orange glow of the streetlights. A neighbor's dog barking twice, then going silent. Civilian life was strange. He'd known it would be. The silence of it. The smallness of the conflicts. The way people fought about parking spots and school committees and whether someone had looked at them wrong in a hallway. Meyer. He didn't miss combat. He missed clarity. The absolute brutal clarity of knowing exactly what the mission was and exactly what it would cost to complete it. Get Sophie into Maplewood. Keep her safe. Give her everything her mother would have wanted. That was the mission now. And Tommy Jameson had never failed a mission. He had been shot at, detonated on, ambushed, strangled, frozen, starved, sleep-deprived to the point of hallucination. He had been dismissed by a woman in a gunmetal blazer. None of it had stopped him yet. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. And he didn't know it yet. None of them did. But the moment Tommy Jameson sealed that envelope and made that promise to his daughter, the clock started counting down toward a day that would change everything. Not just for him, for all of them. The application was submitted on a Wednesday morning. Tommy drove it to the school himself, instead of mailing it, not because he didn't trust the postal service, but because he needed to see the building with his own eyes. Needed to walk the perimeter, as D-Rock would say. Know the ground before you fight on it. Maplewood Academy was everything the brochure promised and everything Tommy expected. Red brick clean lines, a flagpole out front, with the American flag moving slow in the October wind. Through the front gate, he could see a courtyard where a few kids were running between classes, backpacks bouncing, voices sharp and bright, the way children's voices always are. He stood at the gate for a moment longer than he needed to. Sophie would love it here. He could see it as clearly as he'd ever seen a target. He dropped the envelope with the front office receptionist, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Greer, who stamped it with the date and told him to expect a response within 4 to 6 weeks. He thanked her. He drove home. Then he waited. And waiting, he had learned a long time ago, was its own kind of combat. The days moved in their new rhythm, the rhythm of a life still finding its shape. He woke at 5 every morning out of habit his body refused to unlearn. Ran 6 miles in the dark. Came back, showered, had coffee, got Sophie up at 6:30. Made her breakfast. Drove her to Jefferson Elementary, which was her current school, the one they were using as a bridge until Maplewood came through. He watched her walk through the doors every morning with his hands on the steering wheel, and a prayer he never quite said out loud. He'd found part-time work at a security consulting firm downtown, a place called Fortress Group that was run by a former Army Ranger named Hector Cruz, who had exactly 0 patience for bureaucracy and an almost violent appreciation for competence. It wasn't what Tommy imagined doing long-term, but Hector paid well, asked good questions, and didn't make him explain himself. That was worth something. The real work, though, the work that occupied the back of his mind at every hour, was the Maplewood situation. He went back to the community group the following Tuesday. He went the Tuesday after that. He kept showing up because that was what he did. You held your position. You didn't retreat just because the terrain was uncomfortable. Nah. He wasn't welcomed. He wasn't excluded either, not overtly, not in ways anyone could point to. It was subtler than that. It was the conversations that paused when he approached and resumed at a slightly different angle when he joined. It was the way certain parents smiled at him with their mouths only. It was the way invitations circulated, a dinner here, a weekend gathering there, through text chains he wasn't part of, confirmed by the casual references people made to things he'd never been told about. But he noticed all of it. He said nothing about any of it. Gary Kowalski stayed consistent, solid. He'd grab coffee with Tommy after the Tuesday meeting, sit with him in the parking lot of the Dunkin' on Route 9, and talk not about strategy or positioning or how to play the social game, just talk. About football. About his daughter Lily's obsession with horses. About his wife Maria's ongoing war with the HOA. Normal stuff. Breathing room. You're getting under her skin. Gary said one Tuesday, pulling the lid off his coffee. Catherine's. Tommy looked up. I'm not doing anything. That's what's getting under her skin. Gary grinned. You keep showing up. You don't perform. You don't try to impress her. You don't ask her for anything. For a woman who's used to everyone either wanting something from her or avoiding her, you're completely alien. He tapped his cup against Tommy's. It's driving her crazy. Good, Tommy said, and meant it less than he sounded. Date. The truth was, Catherine Foster wasn't something he thought about much. He thought about Sophie. He thought about the application. He thought about the mortgage payment he needed to make on the Virginia Beach house, the house he was renting out. Now the house where Sophie had taken her first steps, where Rachel had died in the guest room on a February night 18 months ago, with her hand in his, and the snow falling outside, and everything that was supposed to be their future quietly folding itself away. He didn't think about Catherine Foster until the day she made it impossible not to. It was the third Tuesday meeting, and it had been running long because Deborah Sweet overwhelmed Deborah had introduced a new agenda item about the school's fall fundraiser, the annual gala, Maplewood's biggest event of the year. Silent auction live music parents shelling out more per table than Tommy made in 2 months. The planning committee was being assembled. We need volunteers for the logistics subcommittee, Deborah was saying, clicking through slides with the distracted energy of someone who knew the real meeting was happening in the sidebar conversations around her. Anyone with experience in event coordination, vendor management, that sort of thing? I'll do it, Tommy said. The room paused. Not dramatically, just the subtle stall of a group recalibrating. Deborah looked up from her laptop with what Tommy could only describe as grateful terror. Oh, that's yes. Thank you, Mr. Jameson. Tommy, he said. Tommy, yes. She typed something. Anyone else? Janet, the Korean-American mother he'd met the first day, raised her hand quietly. She caught Tommy's eye and gave him the smallest nod. He returned it. Catherine Foster, seated at the front left, as always, had not turned around. But her pen had stopped moving, which Tommy clocked from 3 rows back, because he clocked everything. After the meeting broke, she found him. Again near the exit. Again, with that deliberate positioning that she deployed with the confidence of someone who'd never been taught to see through it. Volunteering for logistics, she said. Not a question. That's what I said. Do you have experience with that kind of event planning? He looked at her. I have planned the extraction of 12 men from a compromised position in a foreign country in under 40 minutes with no communications equipment. A beat. I can coordinate a silent auction. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, and this time it stayed longer. 3-4 seconds of actual evaluation rather than the performance of it. The gala committee meets on Thursday evenings, she said finally. 7 o'clock. The planning office is in the east wing of the school. I'll be there. She turned to leave, then stopped. Turned back just slightly, just enough for the words to reach him without the vulnerability of full eye contact. The other committee members have been working on this for 6 months, Mr. Jameson. It would be in everyone's interest if the newest volunteer came prepared, rather than just present. She walked away. Tommy stood there for a moment. Then, almost involuntarily, the corner of his mouth moved. Game on. He spent Wednesday evening doing what any competent operator did before entering unknown territory reconnaissance. He pulled up the Maplewood Gala from previous years, found the event in local society pages, dug up vendor lists from public records, read through the community board minutes that mentioned the fundraiser. He built a working picture of how the event operated, what it needed, where it was inefficient, what its actual goals were versus its stated ones. The gala raised money for the school's scholarship fund, supposedly. But looking at the numbers, the scholarship fund received roughly 30% of net proceeds. The rest went to operational costs, vendor fees, and event development, which was a category so vague it was essentially a blank check. He wrote notes in his small, tight handwriting, the same handwriting he'd used to write field reports in the field. He didn't bring a legal pad to Thursday's meeting. He brought one single index card. The planning office was a converted classroom with a long table, 6 chairs, and a whiteboard covered in timelines and vendor names. When Tommy walked in at 6:58, 5 people were already there. Catherine sat at the head of the table. Priscilla Langford was to her right. A man named Bradford Elliott, who Tommy had learned was a commercial real estate attorney, sat beside Priscilla with his reading glasses on, reviewing something on his tablet. 2 other women whose names he hadn't learned yet were talking quietly near the window. "Mr. Jameson," Catherine said. "Ms. Foster." He found an open chair midway down the table and sat. Bradford Elliott looked him over with the practiced disinterest of a man who billed $400 an hour and knew exactly what that meant about the world. "You're the new volunteer." "That's me." "Previous gala experience?" "None," Tommy said. Bradford exchanged a half-second glance with Priscilla. The kind of glance that didn't need words because the words had already been spoken somewhere else in some other room without Tommy present. Catherine opened a leather folder. "Let's get started. We have 7 weeks. The venue is confirmed, the Harrington Ballroom. Catering is still unresolved. Our usual vendor Palazzo has indicated a 40% price increase from last year, which is frankly unacceptable. Bradford has been looking into alternatives." Bradford nodded. "I have 2 options. Neither is as good as Palazzo." "That's not good enough," Catherine said. "What about Meridian events? Meridian is booked through December. Find out who canceled. Offer them more." "Catherine, their going rate for a 200-person event is—" "I know their going rate." Tommy looked at his index card. Then he spoke. "There's a catering group out of Westfield called Cardinal Table. Former restaurant group went event only 2 years ago. Their head chef worked at Palazzo for 8 years. He's actually the guy who built Palazzo's signature menu. Their pricing is 20% under market, and they have an opening the night of the gala." He set the card on the table. "I reached out yesterday. They're interested." Silence. Bradford looked at him, then at Catherine. Catherine was looking at the card. "You reached out," she said slowly. "I did." "To a catering company?" "I did." "Without authorization from this committee?" Tommy held her gaze. "I made a phone call. I haven't signed anything. The committee authorizes whatever the committee decides to authorize." He kept his voice completely even. "I just came prepared. I'm—" Another beat of silence. Priscilla was looking at Catherine the way a dog watches its owner approach an unfamiliar noise, waiting for the signal on how to react. Catherine looked at the card again. A long moment. Then she picked it up. "Get me their portfolio," she said, to Tommy, without looking at him. "Already emailed it to Deborah," he said. "She can forward it to the group." Something happened to the air in the room. Not warming, not yet. But something shifted in the molecular structure of it. Bradford went back to his tablet, but the disinterest had been replaced by something else. The 2 women by the window were watching Tommy with open curiosity. And Priscilla was looking at Catherine, waiting. Catherine gave nothing. She moved to the next agenda item as if the exchange had not occurred. She was good. She was very good. But Tommy had spent enough time reading rooms and reading people to know that he had just been filed into a different category in her mental ledger. Not friend, nowhere close to that, but no longer irrelevant. The meeting ran 90 minutes. Tommy spoke when he had something to say and stayed quiet when he didn't, another habit from the military that served him better in civilian life than he'd expected. People who talked to fill silence tended to reveal more than they intended. He had learned to let silence do its work. Driving home, he called D-Rock. "How was it?" "Interesting," Tommy said. "She tried to freeze you out." "She tried, didn't hold." "What changed?" "Cardinal Table." He emerged onto the highway. "I came in with something they didn't have. Hard to dismiss that in front of a room." D-Rock was quiet for a moment. "You know what you're doing, right? You're running an op." "I'm planning a school fundraiser." You're running an op, D-Rock said again. Not critically, just naming the thing. You're gathering intel, identifying leverage points, placing assets. That's what you're doing. Tommy thought about it. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. Question is it working? It's working, Tommy said. Slowly. Slowly is fine, D-Rock said. Slow is smooth. Smooth is way. Fast. Yeah, I know. Just making sure you remember. Mete. Sophie was still awake when he got home, which she technically shouldn't have been, and they both knew it. She was sitting up in bed with a flashlight and a book about marine biology because she had recently decided she wanted to be a marine biologist and had approached the project with what Tommy could only call alarming commitment. Dad, she said, not looking up. Soph. Did you know a mantis shrimp can punch with the force of a bullet? He sat on the edge of her bed. I did not know that. Their eyes can see 16 colors. Humans only see 3. She finally looked up. Isn't that insane? Profoundly insane. She studied him for a moment with those blue eyes. You look tired. I'm okay. Was the meeting hard? He paused. It was fine. Dad. Her voice had that tone, the one that made her sound 40 years old and slightly exasperated with him. I can tell when you're doing the face. What face? The face where you're trying not to let me know something is hard. She closed the book. I'm 7, not 2. He looked at his daughter, this impossible, luminous, straight-shooting daughter of his. It's getting better, he said, and meant it. Is that lady still being mean? He went still. What lady? Emma's mom told Emma that a lady at the school group doesn't like you. Sophie said it matter-of-factly, the way kids relay information without understanding the freight it carries. Emma told me. She felt bad about it. Tommy breathed through his nose. The neighborhood gossip network was apparently faster than military intelligence. Her name is Ms. Foster, he said carefully. And she doesn't know me yet. That's different from not liking me. Sophie considered this. Is that the nice version of what's happening? Probably. She nodded slowly. Then she reached out and put her small hand on his arm. That gesture she'd had since she was 3, that particular way she had of anchoring herself to him. It doesn't matter if she likes you, Sophie said. You're the best person I know. He covered her hand with his. You need to go to sleep. I know. She didn't move. Daddy? Yeah, we're going to be okay, right? He looked at her for a long moment. Thought about the application, the meeting, Catherine's face when he'd placed the index card on the table. The slow, grinding, invisible work of proving yourself in a world that had already decided not to see you. We're always okay, he said. That's the rule. She smiled, settled back against her pillow. He tucked the blanket up, took the flashlight, set the marine biology book on the nightstand. Good night, Soph? Good night, Dad? A pause. The mantis shrimp thing is really impressive. I'll think about it all night, he said. She was asleep before he reached the door. He stood in the hallway for a moment, hand on the doorframe in the dark and the quiet of the house, thinking about 16 colors, about how the world looked different depending on what kind of eyes you had, about what Catherine Foster saw when she looked at him, and about what she didn't see yet. The gala was in 7 weeks. Sophie's application decision was coming in 4 to 6. And somewhere between those 2 clocks, something was building, the way pressure builds before a storm, invisible and inevitable, in the kind of quiet that only people with trained instincts know to pay attention to. Tommy went to bed. He didn't know yet what form it would take, but he knew the way you know certain things in your body before your mind catches up, that before this was over, Catherine Foster was going to have to look at him again. And when she did, it would not be the same look. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Tommy was at work when it came. Hector had him reviewing a security assessment for a logistics company downtown, the kind of desk work that made his leg bounce under the table, and Mrs. Greer from Maplewood's front office called his cell at 2:17 in the afternoon. He almost didn't pick up because he didn't recognize the number. Then something in his gut said, "Pick up the phone, Tommy," and he did. "Mr. Jameson, this is Patricia Greer from Maplewood Academy." Her voice was careful, professionally careful, which was different from warm. "Dr. Marsh has asked me to inform you that the admissions committee has completed its preliminary review of Sophie's application." He set down his pen. And a pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. "Sophie's academic record is exceptional. The committee was very impressed." Another pause. "However, the committee has determined that there are currently no available spaces in the second grade cohort that would be an appropriate match. We'd like to place Sophie on our priority waitlist, which—" "What number?" Tommy said. "I'm sorry. What number on the waitlist?" Another pause. Longer this time. 14. He looked at the wall across from his desk. Looked at it for a long time. "Thank you, Mrs. Greer," he said. He hung up and sat there with the phone in his hand. Yet, 14. In a school that had admitted 9 new second graders last year. In a class where the attrition rate kids transferring out or moving averaged 2 per year. 14 on the wait list was not a number with hope built into it. 14 on the wait list was a number designed to let a family down gently over a long period of time. Hector appeared in the doorway of his office, looked at his face. "Bad news." "School thing," Tommy said. "The fancy one." "Yeah." Hector leaned against the doorframe, crossed his arms. He was a compact, dark-eyed man who had exactly 0 decorative impulses. His office walls were bare, his desk was military clean, and his communication style was somewhere between a telegram and a punch. "You want my opinion?" "Not particularly." "Too bad. My opinion is that school has been stringing you along since day one, and whoever's running that operation made the decision about your daughter before she ever read the application." He watched Tommy carefully. "And you already know that." Tommy looked up. "The question," Hector said, "is what you're planning to do about it." "I don't know yet." "Yes, you do." Hector pushed off the doorframe. "You just don't want to say it out loud because once you say it out loud, you have to commit to it." He went back to his own office. Over his shoulder, "You've got a gala committee meeting tonight, right?" 7 o'clock. "Go." The door of his office didn't slam. Hector was too deliberate for that, but it closed with a finality that made the point clearly enough. Tommy picked up his pen again, stared at the assessment report on his desk without reading a single word of it. 14. He thought about Sophie at the kitchen table, legs swinging pencil tapping. "I trust you." He thought about Rachel, about the way she would have handled this. Rachel had been the talker, the one who could walk into any room and in 20 minutes know everyone's name, their kids' names, their dog's name, their preferred weekend activity. She had this gift of making people feel like they'd always known her. Tommy had always thought that was the better skill. Turns out it was just a different one. He thought about what D-Rock had said. "She don't know what you had to become." He picked up his phone again, called Gary Kowalski. "They waitlisted Sophie," he said when Gary picked up. Gary was quiet for a moment. "Number 14. A sound that wasn't quite a word. Then, "Tommy, I'm sorry." "It's Catherine Foster." "Probably." "You know it is." Another silence. "I know it's likely. There's a difference." "Is there?" Tommy's voice was steady, controlled. The voice he used when he was operating in conditions where losing control was not an option. "She sits on the admissions advisory committee. Deborah told me that 2 weeks ago, casually, like it was common knowledge. She advises Dr. Marsh on community fit. which means she doesn't pick the students directly, she just tells the principal who fits and who doesn't, and the principal makes the decision. He paused. That's not a difference, Gary. That's a mechanism. Gary breathed out slowly. What are you going to do? Keep showing up. To the gala committee. To everything. He stared at the wall. She's betting that I'll get tired and go away. Most people do. It's a better strategy than direct confrontation because it leaves no fingerprints. He set down his pen. But I don't get tired, Gary. It's not something I know how to do. Gary was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll see you tonight, and hung up. The gala committee that evening had a different texture than the previous meetings. Something had shifted, not seismically, not obviously, but the way barometric pressure shifts before weather. Bradford Elliott arrived with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, which Tommy read as a small but deliberate relaxation of his standard posture. The two women he'd since learned their names, Patricia and Diane, had begun directing occasional questions to him without waiting for Catherine's lead. And Janet, who had been added to the committee 2 weeks prior in a development that Tommy suspected was not coincidental, sat beside him and debriefed him quietly as he arrived. Cardinal table confirmed, she said, barely above a whisper. Catherine called them herself this morning. She's going to announce it tonight like she found them. Tommy sat down. That's fine. Janet looked at him. That doesn't bother you. She gets the credit. Sophie gets the school. I'll take that trade. Janet studied him for a second with an expression that was half admiration and half the careful look of someone recalibrating their read on a person. What? Catherine opened the meeting without preamble. She was all efficiency tonight, clicking through agenda items at a pace that suggested she was either deeply on top of things or deeply uncomfortable with the pacing when she wasn't. Catering is resolved. Cardinal table. Their portfolio is strong. Their pricing is workable, and their chef has a relationship with this community that I believe will resonate. She didn't look at Tommy when she said it. Didn't look away from him either. Venue walkthrough is next week. I'll need 2 committee members to accompany me. Patricia and Diane, can you manage Thursday afternoon? They could. Audio-visual. Bradford, where are we? Bradford looked up from his tablet. Quotes from 3 vendors. The best value is actually a smaller outfit, local good reviews. Send it to the group. She moved on. Volunteer coordination. We need 40 parent volunteers night of. Sign-ups are at 40%. She looked down the table. This is where we're behind. Logistics, that's your area. Her eyes landed on Tommy. I'll handle it, he said. We need 40, not 38, 40. I heard you. A beat. The volunteer coordinator role is significant, Mr. Jameson. It requires Ms. Foster. His voice was even, not aggressive, just grounded the way a load-bearing wall is grounded. I'll have 40 confirmed volunteers by next Tuesday, with roles assigned, briefing materials written, and a contingency list in case of no-shows. He glanced at the table. I'll also have a communication timeline, a check-in protocol, and a problem escalation chain so that night of issues can be resolved without coming to you at all. He looked up. Does that cover it? The room was very quiet. Catherine looked at him with an expression that was doing several things, simultaneously evaluating, resisting, recalculating. It was the most human her face had ever looked in his presence. That covers it, she said. Bradford Elliott very quietly cleared his throat. It might have been a cough. It might not have been. The meeting ended at 8:45. Tommy stayed to help stack chairs, which was not a thing any of the other committee members did. Patricia and Diane stayed too, and the 3 of them worked in a comfortable silence for a few minutes until Patricia said, "You were in the Navy." "SEAL teams," Tommy said. 12 years. "My brother did 2 tours in Iraq, Army." She handed him a folded table. "He had a hard time when he came back." "Most do." "Are you—" She stopped herself. "I'm okay," he said. "Got a good reason to be." She smiled at that. Didn't ask more. He appreciated it. Outside in the parking lot, Gary fell into step beside him. "She's going to make her move soon," Gary said. Tommy glanced at him. "What move?" "I don't know exactly, but I know how she operates. She's been recalculating you. You can see it. And with Catherine, when she can't dismiss someone, she pivots. She finds a way to reframe the situation so that she's still the one in control of the narrative." He shoved his hands in his jacket pockets. "Just watch your back at the family mixer next week." "The what?" "Didn't you get the email Maplewood does a mid-cycle informal family mixer for applicant families? Pizza kids running around low-key. But Catherine runs it." He looked at Tommy sideways. "It's where the real evaluation happens. Not the application. Not the committee. The mixer." Tommy stopped walking. "And nobody told me. Deborah sent the email 3 weeks ago. It went to the group list." Gary looked uncomfortable. "Your email might have been added to the list after that batch went out. Or it had been left off intentionally." Tommy didn't say that. Neither did Gary, because neither of them needed to. The mixer was the following Friday evening, 6 to 8 p.m. in the Maplewood Gymnasium. Tommy showed up with Sophie at 5:58, which he knew was slightly early and did not care. Sophie was wearing her good dress, the navy blue one with the white collar, and she'd asked him 3 times in the car if her hair looked okay. "Your hair is perfect," he told her each time. "But does it look like I tried too hard?" "Sophie, you are 7. 7-year-olds can try too hard. Your hair is fine." She smoothed the front of her dress as they walked in. He watched her clock the room the way she always did, quick, systematic, the way he'd probably taught her to do without meaning to. And then her face broke into a genuine smile, because there were other kids in there already running, and a kid in motion was an invitation. Sophie Jameson had never once turned down in her life. "Go ahead," he said. She was gone before the sentence finished, and he found Gary near the drink table. Janet was there too, with her son, a quiet boy named Marcus, who watched Sophie torpedo across the gym with something approaching awe. The parents circulated. Tommy did what he always did. Stayed grounded, engaged when engaged, observed when not. He talked to a couple he hadn't met before, a construction contractor named Pete and his wife Deb, who were refreshingly straightforward, and spent most of the conversation asking Tommy about Virginia Beach, because they'd vacationed there once. He talked to Dr. Marsh briefly, the head of school, a careful man in his mid-50s, with a politician's handshake and a consultant's eyes, who said all the right things with exactly none of the warmth they implied. And Catherine Foster moved through the room like she always did, working it, owning it, threading through clusters of parents with a word here and a laugh there, always seeming to end up exactly where she intended to be. She ended up near Tommy about 40 minutes in. "She's lovely," Catherine said, nodding toward Sophie, who had organized what appeared to be an impromptu relay race involving 4 other children and a foam pool noodle she'd found somewhere. "Yeah," Tommy said. "She is. Athletic. Gets that from me." A small pause. "And her mother?" The question was light, professional, the kind of light that takes real effort to maintain. Tommy looked at Sophie for a moment. Her mother passed, 18 months ago. Catherine absorbed that. To her credit, something genuine moved across her face, not performance. Actual human response. "I'm sorry," she said. "Thank you." A beat of silence that was almost not uncomfortable. Then Catherine said, "There's a waiting list for 2nd grade." "I know," Tommy said. 14. She didn't react to the number. She'd known he knew. The list moves. It's not static. "I understand how lists work." She was looking at Sophie. "She organized those children in about 4 minutes. That's what she does," Tommy said. "She walks into a room and she sees what it needs and she does it. She's been doing that since she was 4. He paused. Her mother was the same way. He wasn't sure why he said that. He didn't usually hand people things like that, small, real things about his life. But something about the moment felt like it could hold it. Catherine said nothing for a moment. Then, the committee reconvenes next month. Applications are reviewed again if positions open. He looked at her directly. Is that information, or is that a promise? She met his eyes. It's information, Mr. Jameson. I don't make promises about things I don't control. And things you do control. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. I'll be in touch, she said and moved on. Tommy watched her go. Gary appeared at his elbow like a man who had been watching from 6 feet away, which he had. What just happened? Gary said. I have no idea, Tommy said honestly. But something had. He could feel it, the way he could feel a shift in the wind, not the shift itself, not the reason for it, just the fact of it. Something in the molecular structure of the situation had moved. Slightly. Incrementally. He filed it away and didn't build anything on top of it yet. Sophie found him 20 minutes later, flushed and breathless, and trailing 2 new friends behind her like she'd always known them. Dad, this is Cora, and this is Brendan, and Brendan's dad says he used to be in the Coast Guard, and I told him you were a SEAL, and he said that's really cool. Brendan's dad turned out to be a thick-shouldered man named Frank DeLuca, with an easy grin and a handshake that communicated immediately that he was exactly who he appeared to be. They talked for the rest of the evening football, the Navy-Coast Guard rivalry, the particular insanity of trying to find a good barber after you left the service. Normal conversation, the kind that didn't require anything from either of them except the pleasure of it. Driving home. Sophie was quiet in the back seat in the specific way she got when she was processing something not sad, quiet, thinking quiet. I liked it, she said finally. Yeah. I want to go there. Her voice was simple and direct. I really do, Dad. He watched the road. I know. Are we going to get in? The question sat in the car. He could feel the weight of it. He thought about Catherine's face during their conversation. The moment brief real, when her calculation had dropped and something more human had looked out. I think we're getting closer, he said. Sophie accepted that the way she accepted most things he said fully without reservation, because she had decided at some point in her short life that her father's word was a thing you could stand on. He hoped with everything in him that he deserved that. The house was dark when they got home. He put Sophie to bed. No flashlight reading tonight, she was asleep before he'd finished tucking the blanket. And then he sat at the kitchen table and didn't turn the light on. Just sat in the dark with the quiet of the house around him. Something was coming. He could feel it as clearly as he'd ever felt anything in the field. Not danger exactly. Something more complicated than that. A moment that was building beneath the surface of everything, beneath the committee meetings and the mixer small talk and the carefully maintained social distance, a moment that was going to demand something real from everyone involved. He didn't know what it was yet. But he knew with the absolute certainty of a man who had lived long enough in high-stakes situations to recognize the shape of them, that when it arrived, there would be no room for performance. Only for what a person actually was. He got up, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. The gala was 11 days away when everything changed. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of flat gray November Wednesday that doesn't announce itself as significant in any way. No particular weather, no particular tension, just an ordinary day moving at its ordinary pace. Tommy was at the school, helping set up a volunteer coordination meeting he'd called himself, using the planning office that Deborah had given him a key to 3 weeks prior after he'd quietly, consistently demonstrated that he was the kind of person who returned borrowed things and left rooms cleaner than he found them. He had 43 volunteers confirmed. He'd told Catherine he'd have 40. He didn't mention the extra 3. The planning office was in the east wing, which put him adjacent to the main corridor that connected the gymnasium to the administrative suite. He was at the table reviewing printed briefing packets. He'd written them himself clear and structured the way he wrote every operational document when he heard the first sound. Shub. It wasn't a scream. It was something lower than a scream, more compressed. The kind of sound that people make when a scream is the right response, but the body is too shocked to fully commit to it yet. He was moving before he'd consciously decided to move. 12 years of SEAL training does not leave the body just because the uniform does. He was in the corridor in 4 seconds. The smell hit him first. Smoke. Not heavy, thin, acrid, the specific chemical bite of electrical burning rather than wood or fabric. He looked right. The corridor was clear. He looked left. 30 yards down near the junction that led to the gymnasium, a door was open that should have been closed, and a darkness was coming from behind it that didn't match the light in the hallway. He heard voices now, adult voices rising in pitch, and beneath them, the sound he'd been hoping not to hear. Children. He ran. The gymnasium corridor junction was where the building's oldest electrical panel lived. He'd noted it 3 weeks ago during the venue walkthrough, because it was a load-bearing detail in his event layout plan, and because he noticed infrastructure the way other people noticed furniture. The panel was in a maintenance closet just off the junction, a closet that, according to the venue notes, had been flagged twice in the past 18 months for electrical irregularities and had been scheduled for repair in the kind of language that meant it hadn't been repaired yet. The closet door was open, and the panel inside it was burning. Not catastrophically, not yet. But the junction box was arcing blue-white flashes in the smoke, and the smell was the specific smell of insulation beginning to catch, which meant there was a narrow window between problem and catastrophe, and that window was closing. And standing in front of it frozen was a maintenance worker named Earl. Tommy had met him twice during planning sessions, a quiet older man in his 60s who kept the building with evident pride, and Earl was pale in a way that told Tommy everything. He'd tried to intervene, realized he was in over his head, and his body had done what untrained bodies do. In unexpected emergencies, it had stopped. Earl. Tommy's voice was flat and clear. Operational. Step back. Now. All the way to the far wall. Earl moved. Tommy assessed. The panel was a 1970s-era breaker box, retrofitted once probably in the 90s. The arc was at the main junction, which meant the load was distributed through every circuit in this wing. He couldn't kill the arc by touching the panel, not without protection. He didn't have, but he could kill the source. Earl. Building emergency shutoff. Where? Earl blinked. The boiler room main shutoff is in the boiler room, but you have to go through the... How do I get there? East exterior door, then the service passage then. Key. Earl fumbled at his belt. His hands were shaking badly. This one, the square head, the silver. Tommy took the ring, found the key by shape and description in under 2 seconds, handed the ring back. Stay in the corridor, don't go back in that room. If the smoke gets heavier, pull the fire alarm and get outside. Can you do that? Yes, Earl said. And something in Tommy's voice, the absolute calm of it, the precision had transferred itself to the older man like a current. He stood up straighter. Yes, I can do that. Good man. Tommy went. Sorry. The exterior door. The service passage, narrow concrete. The smell of cold air and machine oil. The boiler room was 60 feet down a heavy door, the key turning on the second try. He found the main shutoff panel by the emergency lighting that had kicked on automatically, a red-handled master breaker the size of a hand. He pulled it. The building's hum died instantly. Emergency lighting came on throughout. And the soft, terrible crackling sound from the panel room, which he'd been tracking with one ear even 3 corridors away, stopped. He stood in the boiler room for exactly 3 seconds. Then he went back. By the time he returned to the main corridor, it was no longer quiet. The fire alarm had activated, not because of the fire which he'd cut before it spread, but because the sudden power outage had triggered the building's backup alert sequence. Teachers were moving children out of classrooms in the orderly, practiced way that fire drills exist to create. The corridor was full of kids, small faces, wide eyes, some excited, some frightened, all of them moving where they were directed. Tommy stood at the junction and directed traffic. Literally. He positioned himself at the split between the two main evacuation routes and sent each teacher's group the right way based on where the smoke had been keeping the east corridor clear, moving families toward the front exits. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice carried naturally in a way that made people want to follow it, which was one of those qualities you either had or you didn't and couldn't really be taught. He spotted Sophie in the third group out second grade from Jefferson was here for a joint school tour event he'd actually written in his calendar, and she spotted him at the same moment. Her eyes went wide, not with fear, but with the particular expression she got when the world did something unexpected and she was trying to decide how to file it. He gave her a small nod. "I'm here. You're fine. Keep moving." She nodded back, kept moving. He watched her go through the front exit into the gray afternoon following her teacher, and something in his chest unlocked just slightly. He was still at the junction when Catherine Foster came around the corner from the administrative suite. She was moving fast, portfolio gone, jacket gone, the controlled presentation of her completely displaced by the reality of 200 children evacuating from her school. Her assistant was behind her talking into a phone. A facilities manager Tommy hadn't met was beside her waving his hands in a way that communicated clearly that he had no answers. She saw Tommy standing at the junction directing the last group of teachers out, and she stopped. "What happened?" she said. Not to the facilities manager, to Tommy. "Electrical failure in the maintenance closet off the gymnasium junction. Arcing at the main panel insulation was starting to catch. I killed the master breaker from the boiler room." He kept his voice even, efficient. "The source is neutralized. The closet needs a fire safety inspection before the wing is reopened, and that panel needs to be replaced, not patched. I'd call in that flag today rather than tomorrow." She stared at him. "Everyone's out," she said. "Earl confirmed 2 minutes ago that the corridor was clear. Teachers have their groups. You'll want to do a head count at the assembly point." She absorbed all of this. Something was happening in her face that he hadn't seen before. Not calculation, not performance, not the managed social machinery that ran everything else. Just a woman standing in a corridor, processing the fact that a crisis had arrived and been resolved in the window of time it took her to walk from one end of the building to the other. "You killed the power," she said. "Yes." "Alone." Earl helped. He knew the layout. Earl was frozen. Her facilities manager said quietly. Not cruelly, just truthfully. Catherine looked at him, then back at Tommy. "How did you know what to do?" she asked. And this time the question didn't have any of the weaponized qualities her questions usually carried. It was just a question. "I've been in bad rooms," Tommy said simply. She looked at him for a long time. The sounds of children and teachers outside filtered in through the walls. The specific noise of 200 people standing in parking lots. The way that noise always sounds like both chaos and order, simultaneously, depending on which part of it you're listening to. "Are you hurt?" she said. The question surprised him enough that he almost didn't answer it immediately. "No." She nodded once, turned to her assistant. "Call the fire marshal, and call Dr. Marsh." Then to the facilities manager. "I want that panel report on my desk tonight, not tomorrow." She turned back to the corridor and began walking toward the exit. Then she stopped. She didn't turn around fully. Just a partial turn, the same geometry as their conversation at the orientation, but carrying entirely different weight. "Tommy," she said. "Not Mr. Jameson, Tommy." "Yeah." "Thank you." He watched her go. He stood in the empty corridor for a moment. The emergency lighting made everything amber and flat and quiet. Somewhere outside, someone was doing the head count and calling names, and all the small, essential work of accountability that follows any emergency. He looked at the closed maintenance closet door, at the key in his hand which he'd forgotten to return to Earl. He set it on the floor beside the door, where Earl could find it. Then he went outside to find his daughter. Sophie was with her class group near the front fence, standing beside a girl with red pigtails who appeared to be her new closest friend, based on the proximity and the rate of conversation. When she saw Tommy coming across the parking lot, she broke from the group. The teacher started to say something, then saw Tommy and stopped, and she ran to him with the full-body urgency that children deploy for arrivals that matter. She hit him around the middle. He put his hand on the back of her head. "I saw you in there," she said into his jacket. "You were doing the directing thing." "Yeah." "Were you scared?" He thought about it honestly, the way she'd asked him to always be honest. "No. I knew what to do." She pulled back and looked up at him. "Is everyone okay?" "Everyone's okay." She studied him with those blue eyes, Rachel's eyes doing the thing she did where she read him the way other people read text, looking for what he wasn't saying. "You fixed it," she said. "Earl helped." "Dad." The tone again, the 40-year-old exasperation. "Don't do that." He looked at her. "Do what?" "Give away the credit to make other people feel better. Mrs. Kowalski says you do that." He blinked. "You talk to Mrs. Kowalski about me. We talk about lots of things." She said it with the casual authority of someone whose social life was considerably richer than her parents'. "She says you always do that. Give away credit. She says it's a military thing." "Maria Kowalski said that." "Yep." He shook his head slowly. "Go back to your group, Soph." "Are you going to stay?" "For a while." "Why?" She went back. He watched her. The red pigtailed girl said something, and Sophie laughed, and the laugh carried across the parking lot the way her laugh always did, clear and unstoppable, and entirely itself. Gary found him 20 minutes later after the fire marshal had arrived and the initial inspection was underway, and the organized chaos of the evacuation had begun settling into the administrative chaos of paperwork and phone calls. "I heard you killed the power," Gary said. "News travels fast. Earl's been telling everyone who will listen." Gary looked at him with an expression that was half amusement and half something more serious. "He's telling it like you ran into a burning building." "There was no fire. I got there before the fire." "Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it?" Gary said. "Everybody else got there after the fire. You got there before." Tommy said nothing. "Catherine's been on the phone for an hour," Gary continued. "Different calls. I watched her make 3 of them. And every time she gets off the phone, she looks over here." He paused. "At you." Tommy looked across the parking lot to where Catherine was standing with Dr. Marsh and a man in a fire marshal jacket, a phone still in her hand. Even at this distance, he could see the quality of her attention when she glanced his way. It wasn't the same attention as before. It had a different weight. "What did Marsh say?" Tommy said. "He's shaken. The liability exposure of that panel failing during a school day is significant. Their insurance is going to ask a lot of questions." Gary crossed his arms. "If it had gone further, if that insulation had fully caught with 200 kids in the building..." He didn't finish the sentence. "It didn't," Tommy said. "Because of you. Because I was there, and I knew what to do." Gary looked at him sideways. "You're doing it again." "What?" "The thing Sophie told you about." Tommy turned to look at him. "Sophie told you about that." "She's a talker," Gary said simply, and there was such warmth in it that Tommy almost laughed. "Me." Instead, he looked back at the school building. At the east wing, quiet now, its windows dark from the power shutdown. At the American flag out front, still moving slow in the November wind, the same flag he'd noticed the first time he drove up to this building with a sealed envelope in his hand and a promise to his daughter in his chest. "Gary." "Yeah." "Do you think she'll change her mind about Sophie's application?" Gary was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of someone avoiding an answer, but the quiet of someone giving the question genuine weight. "I think," Gary said slowly, "that Catherine Foster has never had to revise her opinion of a person before. Not really. She has enough money and enough power that the world has mostly accommodated her picture of it." He paused. Today she had to revise. And when a person like that revises when the world actually makes them, they either double down or they change. He watched her across the parking lot. "I think she's changing." "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I've got." Tommy nodded. He stayed until the last school bus had cleared the lot and the fire marshal's team had completed their preliminary inspection. He helped Earl, who had been moved to a bench near the entrance by a school nurse, still pale but steadier, by sitting with him for 15 minutes, talking about nothing in particular, letting the older man's hands stop shaking on their own timeline. Earl said, I froze. I froze." "Everybody freezes," Tommy said. "The trick is just what you do next." "I moved when you told me to." "That's not freezing. That's responding to leadership." Earl looked at him. "You're a good man, Mr. Jameson." Tommy thought about his daughter's voice. "I trust you." About Rachel's hand in his in the winter dark. About D-Rock's voice on the phone. About Gary standing next to him in every parking lot and every corridor. About Janet quietly confirming Cardinal Table. About Patricia stacking chairs. "I've got good people around me," he said. "That helps." On his way out, he passed Catherine one more time. She was wrapping up her last call, walking toward her car. They met in the same parking lot where her Tesla and his cracked mirror Ford F-150 sat 20 spaces apart, exactly as they had every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 weeks. She stopped. "The gala," she said. "We need to meet. Before Thursday. The venue inspection needs to be reevaluated in light of—" She gestured toward the building, which was its own complete sentence. "I'm available tomorrow," he said. 10 o'clock. The school." "I'll be there." She opened her car door, stopped again. He waited. 14, she said. He looked at her. "I know you know the number," she said. "I know you know what it means." She was looking at him directly now, in a way that cost her something. He could see that it cost her something, and respected it for that. "I'm not making promises. I told you I don't do that. But there are factors in the admissions review that are within the committee's discretion to reconsider." "What factors?" he said. Not challenging, just asking. "Community contribution." She held his eyes. "Demonstrated engagement. The quality of the relationship a family has built with the school before their child ever walks through the door." A pause. "Those things matter." He said nothing for a moment. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just the last few staff cars and the fire marshal's truck, and the two of them standing in the November afternoon. "My daughter is exceptional," he said, not aggressively, just as a fact, the way you state facts that you have no doubt about. She would be a contribution to that school the same way she's a contribution to every room she's ever walked into. She does that on her own. I've never had to teach her. He looked at Catherine evenly. "I just want her to have the chance." Catherine looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said quietly. She got in her car. He stood there and watched it pull out of the lot, the Tesla moving silently, disappearing around the corner. He got in his truck, sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. He pulled out his phone, called D-Rock. "Talk to me," D-Rock said. "Something happened today," Tommy said. He told him. All of it, the panel, the smoke, the boiler room, the conversation in the parking lot. D-Rock listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him and meant he was taking it seriously. When Tommy finished, D-Rock was quiet for a moment. "You know what this is," D-Rock said. "Tell me." "It's the moment the mission changed. You went in trying to earn your way and playing their game committee meetings, gala planning, showing up every Tuesday with your flannel on." D-Rock's voice was low and steady. "And today, the game stopped being about earning. Today, it became about something real. And in something real, you're not the outsider anymore. A pause. You're the guy who knew what to do. Yeah. Tommy stared through the windshield at the empty parking lot, at the school building, at the east wing still dark. She called me Tommy, he said. D-Rock laughed, not his wall-shaking laugh, but something quieter and more knowing. Yeah, he said. There it is. It's not over. No. D-Rock agreed. It's not over, but it's different now, and different is how things change. Tommy started the truck. He had to pick Sophie up from the after-school group at Jefferson in 40 minutes. D-Rock. Yeah, brother. I think we're going to be okay. A pause. You were always going to be okay, D-Rock said. You just had to let the world catch up. No. He pulled out of the Maplewood parking lot onto the main road. The November light was going thin and gold at the edges of things, the way it does in the late afternoon when the day is almost done, and everything has a clarity to it that the full brightness of noon doesn't allow. He drove. And for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, the weight that had been sitting between his shoulder blades, the particular weight of a man trying to prove himself in a world that has decided not to see him, was slightly, unmistakably lighter. Not gone. Not yet. But lighter. The meeting the next morning was different from every meeting that had come before it. After Tommy arrived at the school at 9:55, the east wing was still dark, still cordoned off with yellow caution tape that fluttered slightly in the draft from the heating system, and the faint chemical trace of the previous day's smoke still hung at the edges of things, the way bad memories do not, overwhelming, just present enough to remind you. He signed in at the front desk. Mrs. Greer looked up at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Open, a little cautious, like someone who had revised a long-held assumption overnight and hadn't quite settled into the new version yet. She's in the main conference room, Mrs. Greer said. Down the hall, second left. I know where it is, he said. Then, because he meant it, thank you, Mrs. Greer. She nodded. And something in the nod was different from every nod she'd given him before. Catherine was already there when he walked in. She was at the head of the table, of course she was, but she wasn't in her usual posture. Usually she sat with her portfolio open, and her pen in hand, and the full armature of her authority assembled around her like a fortress. Today she had a coffee in front of her, and her hands wrapped around it, and nothing else. No portfolio, no pen. She looked like a woman having a meeting rather than a woman conducting one, and the difference was significant enough that Tommy registered it in the first 2 seconds and filed it without reacting to it. Tommy? She gestured to the chair across from her. Not beside her across, eye level, equal footing. He sat. Coffee. I'm good? She nodded, looked at her cup for a moment, then looked at him. I spoke with Earl last night. How's he doing? Better. He's a proud man. He was embarrassed about how he reacted. She paused. I told him that most people would have done the same. That there's no shame in freezing when you're not trained for a situation like that. She looked at Tommy directly. He told me you said almost exactly the same thing to him in the parking lot. It's the truth. I know. She set down her coffee. The fire marshal's report came in this morning. If that panel had fully ignited. She stopped, pressed her lips together, once a tight, controlled movement that was the closest Tommy had ever seen her come to losing her composure in public. The gymnasium was scheduled for a student workshop at 3 o'clock yesterday. 45 children. She let that land. If it had gone another 20 minutes, it didn't, Tommy said, the same thing he'd told Sophie, the same thing he believed. Because you were there. She said it plainly, without decoration. And because you knew what to do. And because Earl knew his building. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. You're doing the thing again. Gary Kowalski's wife told me about it. Apparently she and your daughter discuss you at some length. Tommy sat back in his chair. Is there anyone in this community who is not in conversation with my 7-year-old? This time Catherine did smile. Small, controlled, but real. The first real smile he'd ever seen from her, and it changed her face entirely, not into someone soft, but into someone actual. Someone with the interior life that matched her exterior intelligence. "She's remarkable," Catherine said, and the way she said it made it clear she wasn't filling space. She meant it the way you mean things when you've thought about them privately and decided they were true. "Yeah," Tommy said. "She is." A moment of quiet passed between them that was for the first time not adversarial. Not warm exactly, they were not at warm yet, and both of them knew it, but honest, which was better in some ways. More durable. "I want to talk about the gala," Tommy said, "but first I want to say something, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish before you respond." Catherine's eyes sharpened slightly, not defensively with attention. "Go ahead. I know what you did with Sophie's application," he said. His voice was even, not accusatory, not soft, just level the way you are when you've decided that the truth is the only useful tool available. "I know you sit on the advisory committee. I know the recommendation you gave to Dr. Marsh was not favorable, and I know it was based on your assessment of me, not of Sophie, not of her record, not of any demonstrated deficiency in her qualifications, but of me." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not saying that to start a fight. I'm saying it because I think we've both been doing a version of performing in this situation, and I'm done performing. I'd rather just talk." Catherine held his gaze. Her jaw was set. He could see her working through the options, deny, deflect, reframe, and he could see her dismiss each one in sequence. Not because she couldn't execute them. She was better at that than almost anyone he'd encountered in civilian life. But because something had shifted, and the performance no longer fit the room. "You're right," she said. He waited. "My recommendation to Dr. Marsh was cautious," she said. "I characterized your family as a potential social integration challenge. I used the term cultural fit concerns." She said the phrase the way people repeat something they've recognized as wrong, not defending it, just naming it accurately. It was the language of someone who had made a decision before gathering real information. She looked at him directly. "I was wrong." The words sat on the table between them. Tommy said nothing for a moment. He let them sit. "Why?" he said finally. She looked at him. "Why was I wrong? Or why did I do it?" "Both." She looked at her coffee cup. "I built this community group. 7 years ago, there were 4 families in this parent organization. Now there are 90. I've raised over $2 million for this school. I have put more of myself into Maplewood than I have put into anything since my son was born." She paused. "And when I look at something I've built, anything I've built, my first instinct is to protect it. To evaluate what fits and what doesn't. To manage the variables." She looked up. "You presented as a variable I didn't have a category for. Military, working class, no network, no history here, no leverage I could identify." She said it without self-pity. It wasn't an excuse, it was an autopsy. "People without leverage make me nervous. I know that's not a flattering thing to admit. It's an honest thing," he said. "Which is what you asked for." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "What I didn't account for," she said slowly, "was that a man without leverage in my world might have capabilities that my world doesn't have a category for either. Yesterday made that very clear." "Yesterday was just a maintenance failure," Tommy said. "I happened to be there, and I happen to know what to do. That's not special, that's just training." "Tommy." Her voice had a weight in it that made him stop. "I have spent 20 years in rooms full of capable people. Lawyers, engineers, surgeons, CEOs, smart people, effective people." She met his eyes. "Yesterday, when I walked into that corridor, I was scared. Not panicked, I don't panic, but I was scared because it was outside my control and I didn't know how to fix it." A pause. "And you were standing there in the middle of it, directing teachers like it was a Tuesday afternoon, and you weren't scared at all. Or, if you were, it made absolutely no difference to what you were doing." She shook her head slightly. That's not just training. That's what a person is made of. Tommy looked at this table. Something in him wanted to deflect that, to hand it to Earl again, to redirect it somewhere that felt more comfortable. But Sophie's voice was in his ear. Don't do that. And so he let it land. Okay, he said. Okay, she echoed. They both picked up their coffee at the same moment, and the small absurdity of it landed on both of them simultaneously, and something in the room broke open just slightly, just enough to breathe through. The gala, he said. The gala, she agreed. No. They worked for 2 hours. Tommy laid out the volunteer coordination structure he'd built. 43 confirmed roles assigned, 2-hour pre-event briefing, scheduled contingency list of 8 backups, with contact info already compiled. He walked her through the communication timeline, the problem escalation chain, the vendor check-in schedule he'd designed so that every arrival had a point of contact and a resolution pathway if something went wrong. He'd built it the way he built every operation, assuming things would go wrong, designing around the failure points, making sure no single breakdown could cascade. Catherine read through it without speaking, turned pages, made 2 small notes in the margin. When she finished, she set it down. This is the most thorough volunteer coordination document this gala has ever had, she said. It's basic operational planning. For you, maybe. She looked at it again. For us, for this community, it's extraordinary. She looked up. Bradford's been the de facto logistics lead for 4 years. He's very good. This is better. Don't tell him that. God, no. This time the smile came easier. She almost laughed. They finished the meeting at 12:15. Tommy gathered his papers and stood. He was at the door when she said his name. I'm going to call Dr. Marsh this afternoon, she said. Sophie's application. I'm going to revise my advisory recommendation. He turned around, faced her fully. The committee makes its own decisions, she said carefully. I can't promise you an outcome. That's still true. She held his eyes. But my input will reflect what I actually know about your family now, not what I assumed in the first 10 minutes. That's all I've ever asked, he said. She nodded once. I know, she said. I know that now. He walked out of the school and into the November air, and stood for a moment at the top of the front steps with the American flag moving above him and the empty parking lot spread out below, and the particular feeling of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been told he can set it down. Not that the journey is over, but that the ground ahead has changed. He called D-Rock from the parking lot. She revised the recommendation, he said. A long silence. Then D-Rock's voice, rough and quiet, and full of something that in any other man would have been called tender. That's my brother. It's not done yet. Committee still decides. Tommy. D-Rock's voice was firm. Take the win. You've earned it. The committee will do what it does, and it will go the way it goes, but you did everything that could be done, and then you did more than that. Take the win. He stood in the parking lot. Let the November air hit his face. Okay, he said. I'm taking it. D-Rock laughed, the full, wall-shaking version this time, the laugh that had gotten both of them through things that deserved much worse reactions. There he is. Now go get your kid. The Maplewood Gala was held on a Friday evening 12 days later, and it was by every measurable standard the best-run event the school had ever produced. Tommy's volunteers arrived 90 minutes early, briefed and assigned and ready, and they moved through the setup of the Harrington Ballroom with the kind of coordinated efficiency that tends to confuse people who have never seen what preparation actually looks like. Cardinal Table's crew arrived exactly on schedule, and the head chef, a broad-shouldered Sicilian man named Marco, who shook Tommy's hand with both of his and said finally, someone who knows how to run a timeline, had the kitchen operational in 40 minutes flat. By 7 o'clock, when the first guests began arriving, everything was running. Not running well, running the way things run when they were designed by someone who understood that running well requires assuming in advance that they won't. Tommy worked the room. He worked it the way he did everything, not performing, not positioning, just present. He checked in with each volunteer station on a rotation identified and resolved 3 small logistical issues before they became visible to anyone, redirected a vendor delivery that had gone to the wrong entrance, and spent 20 minutes talking to a retired Marine colonel who was there as a donor guest and who looked at Tommy within 30 seconds with the instant, wordless recognition of men who have shared a particular kind of experience. "SEAL," the colonel said. "Team 4, Tommy said. "UT, 3rd Battalion 5th Marines, 2 tours in Fallujah." He extended a hand. "Bob Garrity." "Tommy Jameson." Garrity looked around the ballroom. "You run this logistics subcommittee." "That's not what I mean." The colonel looked at him with eyes that had the particular quality of men who have learned to read people in conditions where misreading them was fatal. "I mean you run this whole thing." He tilted his head toward the room. "You can feel it. The organization. Somebody with discipline put this together." Tommy glanced at the room. At the volunteers moving smoothly, the tables dressed precisely the auction items arranged in the logical circulation pattern he'd specified, the lighting calibrated to the room's sightlines. "It's a team effort," he said. "Marines say that too," Garrity said, "after they've already done the work." Tommy smiled. He found Catherine at 9:30 near the end of the evening, after the auction had closed, and the live music was winding down, and the successful fundraiser feeling had settled over the room like a warm current. The final number he'd heard it from Deborah, who had gotten it from the auction coordinator, was $412,000. The highest single event total in the school's history. Catherine was standing near the back of the room with a glass of wine she'd barely touched, watching the room in the way she always watched rooms, cataloging, evaluating. But the specific quality of her attention was different tonight. Less calculation, more something else. Something that looked, if you watched it long enough, like the particular contentment of someone who has done a good thing and knows it. "412, Tommy said, stopping beside her. "I heard." She looked at him. He was in the dark suit he'd bought at a Nordstrom rack in October, the one Sophie had approved with a thumbs up, and the verdict of "you look like a dad in a good way." The volunteer coordination was extraordinary. Multiple committee members said so. "The volunteers were extraordinary. I just organized them." She looked at him sideways. "Kowalski's wife warned me about this habit." "Everybody knows about this habit. Your daughter is largely responsible for that." He shook his head slowly. "She talks to everyone." "She gets that from somewhere," Catherine said, and the implication, casual, almost warm, was not lost on him. They stood for a moment in the low music and the warm light of the room, the way people sometimes stand together in the aftermath of something that went right when it could have gone wrong. "Dr. Marsh called the committee," she said without looking at him. He kept his eyes on the room. "And there's a space in the 2nd grade cohort. A family withdrew 2 weeks ago, relocation to Seattle." She paused. "I submitted my revised recommendation last week. The committee reviewed it yesterday." He waited. "Sophie's in," she said. The words hit him somewhere below the rib cage, in the place that has no good name in English, the place where relief and grief and gratitude all occupy the same square inch. He stood very still. "Spring semester," Catherine continued. "She'll start in January. There's an orientation for new families in December." She turned to look at him. "I wanted to tell you myself. I thought you deserved to hear it from me." He turned to look at her. Really look at her, the way he hadn't fully allowed himself to look at her before. Because looking directly at someone you're in conflict with hands them something. But the conflict was different now. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, all the words there were. She held his gaze. "Thanks, Sophie," she said. "Her application was remarkable. Her essay." She stopped for a second. "Did you help her write it?" "I didn't help her write it. I told her to write about something she loved, And she wrote about mantis shrimp. Catherine blinked. She wrote her Maplewood admissions essay about mantis shrimp. 4 pages, single-spaced. A beat. Then Catherine laughed a real laugh, not the social laugh, not the controlled one. The kind of laugh that comes out when something genuinely surprises you into it. That's extraordinary. That's Sophie. She looked back at the room. Something in her had settled some long-held tension, some structure she'd been maintaining through effort rather than ease. "I want to apologize," she said. "Not as a formality, genuinely." She turned to look at him. "What I did, using my position to influence your daughter's admission based on my assumptions about you, that was wrong. It was the kind of wrong that's hard to see when you're inside it because it wears the costume of standard practice." She said it the way you say things that you've been sitting with for a while, privately turning them over. But it wasn't standard practice. It was discrimination with extra steps. He was quiet for a moment. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "Do you? You're going to say it's fine, or that it's in the past, or that it's not about the apology." She looked at him steadily. "Don't. Let me finish." He waited. "I have spent 20 years building things," she said. "Companies, communities, programs. And I have told myself sincerely I believed this, that I built them on merit, that I valued competence above everything." She paused. "But the truth is, I valued competence that looked like the competence I already recognized, in the wrappers I expected, from the directions I was used to." She looked at Tommy directly. "You don't come in a wrapper I recognize, and I used that as a reason to dismiss you before you ever had a chance to be real to me." A pause. "That's not merit. That's just a sophisticated version of what I thought I was better than." The room moved around them. Music, conversation, the distant clink of glasses. 2 people standing in the back of a ballroom, having the kind of conversation that doesn't usually happen in ballrooms. "I hear you," Tommy said. He meant it. "And I accept the apology." Just like that. Just like that. He held her eyes. "I'm not carrying it. I don't have room for things I'm not carrying anymore. Too much other weight." She looked at him for a moment with something in her face that might have been if you were paying the right kind of attention. Respect. Not the social acknowledgement of it, the real kind. The kind that reshapes how you see someone permanently. "What do you do next?" she said. "After the gala. After Sophie starts at Maplewood. What's the plan?" He thought about it honestly. "Hector, my boss, wants me to go full-time at Fortress Group. There's a program I've been thinking about. Security and leadership training for veterans transitioning out of service. I've got enough contacts, enough experience." He stopped. "I don't know. It's still forming." "Veteran transition support," she said slowly. "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. The look she had was the one he'd seen before, not the social evaluation, the real one, the calculating intelligence without the social armor around it. "NextCore has a community investment fund. We're looking for programs to support in Q1. She said it carefully, measuring each word. "I'm not making you an offer. I'm saying there might be a conversation worth having." He looked at her. "Defense contractor money funding veteran transition programs." She almost smiled. "Stranger things." "Yeah," he said. "They happen." He drove home that night with the windows down, despite the November cold, because he needed the air. Needed to feel the actual physical fact of the night, the chill of it, the dark of it, the realness of a world that had just moved in a direction he'd needed it to move in. He pulled up to the house on Callaway Street. The lights were on inside. He'd left Sophie with Gary and Maria Kowalski for the evening, and Gary's car was still in the driveway, which meant they'd stayed late. He sat in the truck for a moment before going in. He thought about Rachel. He did this sometimes not with grief as the primary note anymore, but with something more complicated and more quiet. Gratitude, maybe, for the time they'd had, for the person she'd been, for the fact that the best of her had been refracted into Sophie, and now walked around in the world in a 7-year-old body, with blue eyes and a 4-page essay about mantis shrimp. And she'd have loved this, he thought. She'd have thought it was hilarious. She'd have made him tell the whole story over dinner, and she'd have laughed at the parts he played down, and she'd have named the mantis shrimp essay thing as the decisive moment immediately because she was always right about those things. He missed her. He would always miss her, but it didn't carry the same weight of emergency that it had in the first year, that crushing constant weight of absence that had made every ordinary moment feel like a small act of survival. It was part of him now. Built in. Not healed over, nothing heals over, not really, but integrated. Carried differently. He got out of the truck. Gary was in the kitchen when Tommy came in, drinking coffee at the table with the comfortable ease of a man in someone else's house who has been there enough to feel at home. Maria had fallen asleep on the couch. Sophie was upstairs, allegedly in bed, almost certainly with a flashlight. "How'd it go?" Gary said. Tommy sat down across from him. 412,000. Gary's eyebrows went up. "Record?" "By 60 grand. Gary shook his head slowly. "And Catherine, Sophie's in." He said it simply, factually, the way you say things that are real. Gary stared at him for a long moment. Then he set down his coffee cup very deliberately and leaned back in his chair. "Tommy Jameson," he said. "Don't make it a thing." "It is a thing." "Gary, you drove up in a cracked mirror truck," Gary said, pointing at him with one thick finger. "You showed up in a flannel shirt to a room full of people who had already decided you didn't count. You got told to your face that you didn't belong there. You got waitlisted at 14. You got your power cut by a woman who's never been told no in her professional life." He shook his head. "And you just kept showing up." "That's all I did." "That's everything," Gary said. "That's the whole thing, Tommy. That's the entire thing." Tommy looked at the table, then up at his friend. "Go home, Gary," he said. "You're getting sentimental." Gary grinned the wide, uncomplicated grin of a man with a Chicago accent and a daughter who loved horses and a wife asleep on a friend's couch. "Maria," he called just loud enough. "Wake up, baby. We gotta go." Maria stirred, said something indistinct, and began the slow, dignified process of a woman waking up from a couch and pretending she hadn't been asleep. Tommy walked them to the door, shook Gary's hand. Maria hugged him, a real hug, the kind that came with a brief tightening and no self-consciousness, and said, "Tell Sophie we're proud of her." "She doesn't know yet." "Then tell her tomorrow, and tell her we're proud of her tomorrow." He watched them go, stood at the door for a moment in the cold. Then he went upstairs. Sophie's room was exactly as he'd expected, flashlight on book, open across her chest, girl, somewhere between asleep and not. The marine biology book had been replaced by a library book about architecture, which was apparently the new passion of the week. He stood in the doorway. "Dad." Her voice was small and sleep-soft. "Yeah, it's me." "How was the party?" "It was good." He came in, sat on the edge of her bed, the same place he always sat. "It was really good." She looked at him with those half-open blue eyes, and even half asleep she had that quality, that straight-line seeing quality, that made you feel looked at rather than just seen. "Something happened," she said. "Something happened," he agreed. She waited. "You're going to Maplewood," he said, "starting in January." She didn't move for a long moment, just looked at him. He watched her process it, the way she always processed big things from the inside out, working through it, before she let it onto her face. Then her face did the thing. The full thing, the gap-toothed smile, the crinkled eyes, the completely uninhibited joy of a child who doesn't yet know that joy is something you're supposed to modulate in public. She sat up and threw her arms around his neck, and he caught her, the way he'd been catching her since she was an infant, instinctively, completely without thinking about it. "I knew it," she whispered into his shoulder. I knew we'd get in. Yeah. I told you. I told you we were going to be okay. He held his daughter. The house was quiet. The street outside was quiet. The whole ordinary night was quiet in the way nights are quiet when something has finally resolved itself and the world doesn't need to make any noise about it. Your essay, he said. The mantis shrimp essay. He felt her grin against his shoulder. What about it? They read it. And I think it might have been the decisive factor. She pulled back and looked at him with absolutely zero surprise on her face. Of course it was, she said. Mantis shrimp are incredible. He laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere down deep where the real things live. He tucked her back in, took the flashlight, set the architecture book aside. She settled against the pillow, already going back under. Daddy? Yeah. I'm glad we came here. He looked at her for a moment. At this small, fierce, entirely herself person who was the reason for every difficult thing he had done for the past 3 years, and the reward for every difficult thing before that. Me too, Soph. Even the hard parts. He thought about it. About the flannel shirt and the cracked mirror truck and the room full of people who had already made their decisions. About Catherine Foster's finger and the 14 on the wait list and the smoke in the corridor and the boiler room in the dark. About Rachel's hand in his in the winter and D-Rock's voice on the phone at every hour and Gary in every parking lot and Janet's quiet nod and Earl standing up straighter. About the weight that had shifted, the ground that had changed. Especially the hard parts, he said. Sophie closed her eyes. He turned off the light and stood in the doorway one more moment in the dark and the quiet of the house that was becoming a home, and he understood with the full, clear, unflinching certainty of a man who has learned the hard way to know the difference between what he's afraid of and what is actually true, that this was what the mission had always been, not to be seen by people who didn't want to see him, not to earn the approval of rooms that had decided before he walked in, not to prove anything to anyone who measured worth in zip codes and table seating and the right kind of last name. The mission had always been simpler than that, and more important. It was the light in a bedroom window on Callaway Street. It was a laugh that carried across parking lots. It was the weight of a 7-year-old who trusted him completely and was right to. Tommy Jameson had been a Navy SEAL. He had operated in the dark and the cold, in places that didn't appear on any map that civilians were allowed to see. He had carried men out of situations that defied surviving. He had been tested in ways that left marks that don't show on the outside. Whoa, he had been told to get lost. And he had stayed anyway because he knew something that Catherine Foster had needed a burning electrical panel to understand, that the measure of a man is not where he comes from, or what room he was born into, or whose name he carries through the door. It is what he does when things go wrong. It is who he stays for when staying is hard. Or it is the promise he makes to a 7-year-old at a kitchen table, and the fact that he keeps it, and the fact that he would always keep it for as long as he had breath in his body and a daughter in the world who needed him to be the man he was. Tommy Jameson had never failed a mission. He wasn't about to start now.